In 2020, the world reeled from the worst public health crisis in a century and extreme weather events brought on by climate change. So what challenges lie ahead in 2021? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. This is The Heat. "2020 has been one for the record books. Not only will it be known as the year of the coronavirus pandemic, but it's also likely to be the hottest year on record. Governments around the world have laid out ambitious climate targets in an effort to lessen the effects of global warming. There's much to discuss. Let's go straight to our panel. Joining us from Virginia, Changhua Wu is the Executive Director of the Professional Association for China's Environment. With us from New York, Sweta Chakraborty is a risk and behavioral scientist. Joining us here in Washington, Alice Hill is a Senior Fellow for Energy and Environment with the Council on Foreign Relations. Also with us in Washington, D.C., Joseph Williams is Senior News Editor at U.S. News and World Report. Welcome to all of you to the show. Changhua Wu, China is the world's biggest consumer of energy. It's also the biggest producer of world's largest energy producer and its largest consumer as well. It's just released a white paper on climate change, on energy, outlining plans to cut back on fossil fuels and foster more international cooperation to cut back and bring down the levels of greenhouse gases. Here's the head of China's National Energy Administration. Let's listen.
We hope the issuing of the white paper will give the public a thorough understanding of China's strenuous efforts in promoting energy development in a green and low-carbon way, and also in making positive contributions to tackling global climate change and boosting sustainable growth of energy. With greater resolve, intensity and measures, we will push forward the energy revolution, speed up the building of an energy system which is clean, low-carbon, safe and high-efficient, and play a greater role in creating a beautiful China as well as a clean and gorgeous world.
So, Changhua Wu, China has got some very ambitious plans. What are the key policies that will drive this green revolution?
Energy policy definitely will be a fundamental piece of the puzzle. And as we were talking about it here, we all know China, of course, is the world's largest energy producer, energy user, but also the largest emitter of the greenhouse gases emissions. So China is taking on the responsibility and obligation to figure out how to radically decarbonize its energy structure. But in the meantime, we all know just focusing on the energy supply won't be adequate. So if you look at the white paper and also some other pieces of the energy policy in China, more and more attention is being paid to the other side, the consumer side, actually. We need to figure out actually how to electrify everything possible at this moment, deploy all the technologies available, energy efficient, clean energy products. In the meantime, as China has already demonstrated to the international community that renewable energy, clean energy is already very competitive. It's reaching the parity, competing with the fossil fuel energy already in China. So I think we put all the pieces together: energy efficiency, saving energy, and non-fossil filing the energy structure. In the meantime, electrifying everything possible at this moment. They pretty much are forming a big part or trunk of the commitment that China is delivering in order to really achieve the set goals to the Paris Agreement, peaking emissions before 2030 and reaching carbon neutrality before 2060.
Okay, Alice Hill, while China has announced these very ambitious plans to counter climate change, the United States over the past 4 years, we know, has gone in the opposite direction. It's withdrawn from the Paris Accord, and we had leaders like Donald Trump, other leaders in the Republican Party as well, describing climate change as a hoax. But there will be a new president coming into office in just a few weeks, Joe Biden. He talked about climate change recently. This is what he had to say. Let's listen.
Folks, we're in a crisis. Just like we need to be a unified nation in response to COVID-19, we need a unified national response to climate change. We need to meet the moment with the urgency it demands, as we would during any national emergency.
So, Alice, there you heard it, Joe Biden describing it as a national emergency. What can we expect from the Biden administration?
I think you can expect very early action. His appointees or his nominees so far are mostly climate focused. Many are veterans of the climate fight. They created the policies under President Obama. They're ready and know how to reverse what President Trump has done, but more importantly, to set a very ambitious agenda. Of course, Vice President-elect has made clear his intent to rejoin Paris, but the United States, I think we can anticipate, will bring much greater ambition going forward. In his re-election plan, he announced goals for 2035 clean power, as well as 2050 net zero.
Shweta Chakraborty, we know that Joe Biden has assembled what he describes as a climate cabinet. We also know that one of the problems in the United States in combating climate change are those who say that combating climate change would mean that the economy will suffer. So what do you expect from the incoming administration?
I am so impressed with those he's already determined to be part of this climate dream team, as they're being referred to. We have Representative Deborah Haaland, who is coming in as the Secretary of Interior, which is incredible. She's the first Indigenous woman to ever be a cabinet-level secretary. And we also have the first Black man leading the EPA. Former EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy is the domestic, now national climate czar. So this team that he's assembled is really focused, not just on the national agenda, but more broadly on the international agenda, working closely with the special climate envoy, John Kerry. So it not only is it going to address the many rollbacks that the Trump administration has attempted to put in place, but it is going to do an entire clean energy revolution with a real focus on environmental justice. And that is this new focus on making up for past mistakes and also coming back in and really leading the global agenda on climate mitigation will be what leads the entire globe now on addressing this climate crisis.
Alice Hill, as Shweta points out, this is the dream team. These are people who are very experienced in dealing with climate change. But how much of a challenge is it going to be to convince politicians sitting on Capitol Hill that there is a need for change? I mean, he has a seasoned politician as his climate czar, John Kerry, but is it still going to be a hard sell?
Well, we are very divided at this moment. So there will be some battles, some uphill battles. But I think you're seeing greater and greater joining or bipartisanship on certain areas of climate. In fact, typically in this last bill that President Trump has threatened to veto, our National Defense Reauthorization Act, we see clean energy provisions in that legislation. Similarly, in this huge bill that, again, President Trump has threatened to veto that would fund the government, as well as provide a stimulus in the wake of the pandemic.
Right.
We see many green measures there. So that is a Congress that's agreeing we need to do better on climate change.
Joseph Williams, as Alice just pointed out, there are many green measures in that stimulus bill, and we've been hearing about the stimulus bill for the last few days. Where are some of these funds going to be allocated?
Well, some of them are going to be towards action at the local level. You're going to have money distributed to organizations that can help individual areas of the country move towards clean energy. But a lot of it is going to be in relief. LIHEAP is one of the programs that's going to get extra money. This is a low-income housing program that helps people make their homes more energy efficient. There's going to be money in there for infrastructure projects, electrification projects, research also. But part of the problem that we're going to have here is, in addition to all this money that President-elect Biden has allocated for climate change, there's going to be problems getting these plans through Congress, particularly if Congress is controlled by Republicans. As you noted, under President Trump, there have been a lot of rollbacks at the EPA, a lot of rollbacks in clean air, clean water standards, but also President Trump is trying to sell off oil rights to the Alaska National Wildlife Reserve, and that's a huge priority that will not only destroy a natural ecosystem, but also could encourage more promotion of oil drilling and could encourage more consumption of oil drilling. So in addition to all these plans that he's got inside tucked inside the stimulus bill, I think that he's got a real mountain to climb if Congress does not necessarily go along. And by Congress, I mean the Republicans in the Senate.
Yeah, but the fact, Joseph, that these funds were in the bill, the fact that they were in there, do you get the sense that maybe sentiment is changing in the U.S. Congress?
It's a remain and see. We'll have to wait and see about that. I know that during the political campaign in 2020, you had a lot of Republicans bashing Democrats over the Green New Deal. They would harsh on their opponents by saying that this is another one of these lefty agenda items where you're going to try to change lead into gold. You're going to try to make clean energy out of something that we don't want. You're going to get rid of jobs. So it was a very powerful argument on the local level. On the national level, I do think that things are changing, particularly because attitudes in the public are changing. You've got more of a majority of Americans, a clear majority of Americans, who believe that something needs to be done on climate change. You have even approaching 40% of Republicans who believe that climate change is an issue. Now, exactly what to do about it, that's where the real conflict lies.
Right. Chang-Hwa Wu, the Chinese President Xi Jinping, he is promising to make China carbon neutral by 2060. But we know that the country still draws about 70% of its energy from fossil fuels, predominantly coal. In fact, the South China Morning Post reported that parts of China have been without power because of shortages of coal, among other things. So how big a challenge is this going to be for China?
The challenge is huge. I think we were all excited when we heard to President Xi Jinping's announcement committing China to an elevated commitment to the Paris Agreement to tackle global climate challenges there. But how do we really deliver that, and has become the biggest challenge or question that needs to be answered on the table today. And right away, actually, the first hiccup or challenge is the sort of, how do we survive, through this freezing winter at this moment. And we all know or agreed that China has to address the coal issues there. Of course, on one side, China has been investing heavily in clean coal technologies there because there is another side of the concern, which is energy security. China does at this moment have lots of coal, but really constrained from oil and natural gas perspective, not like the US. Actually, you have plenty of natural gas, you have energy dependent. China doesn't have that at this moment. So coal, definitely, we all know where the solutions are. But in reality, China, the government and the society, business community, and the people together have to figure out actually how to address that. This is sort of pivoting moment, meaning if we do not really consume so much coal anymore, what are the energy alternatives that need to be put in place? I mentioned earlier, definitely solar wind energy that offer the biggest prospect, but somehow at this moment, if you look at the percentage of installations there, no matter how fast the country has been making the effort so far, it's still not adequate. I think that remains the short-term sort of challenge for the country to figure out how to address that.
Alice, President-elect Biden says that the United States will once again become a part of the Paris Accord once he assumes office. What will that mean in the short term, rejoining the Paris Accord?
Well, there are some mechanical steps that need to be taken, but I think very shortly, in the winter, February or so, the United States will be admitted back. The question for us, of course, is we need to acknowledge that we've had a poor showing in the last 4 years with regard to climate change, but President-elect Biden has been very clear that he wants to follow the pillar that was center to President Obama's approach to climate change, and that is to lead internationally. He has promised that he'll hold a summit within 100 days of his taking office on climate. And you can see already that as he's reached out to world leaders and had contact with them with regard to his recent successful election, climate comes up over and over again. I think his commitment is deep. He's been in this issue for a long time, and he sees this as his chance to really move the United States to where it needs to be, but by doing so, to lead the rest of the world in where all of us need to be to have a safer globe in the future.
Shweta, looking further afield, leaders of the European Union have agreed to make the bloc carbon neutral by 2050. However, Poland, which uses a lot of coal, will be exempt from this. And we also know that the United Kingdom will be leaving the European Union at the end of January. And it has its own plans to cut carbon emissions as well. Still, all member states, and that's more than 24 states, will all have to pull in the same direction if this is going to be achieved. Do you see that happening?
There's renewed excitement over actually reaching the Paris Accord goals that were set 5 years ago because of this new administration in the United States, and also because of the interim conference that was just hosted in the UK, along with along with France and along with the UN, ahead of COP26, which will be hosted in the UK next year. And so this was really just to renew the pledges, renew the national commitments to reducing carbon emissions, and 22 countries did that, including the European Union, including the UK, and including China as well. And that is all ahead of 125 countries promising also to renew their NDCs ahead of COP26 next year. So this interim conference that just occurred this month goes to show that there is momentum that is stemming not just from the current state of affairs and the recognition that we are, in order to reach that initial agreement of ensuring that we do not warm more than 1.5 degrees Celsius by at the end of the century, we really need to double down on the pledges that were made and come up with concrete plans around the world. That, along with Biden's new administration, really is proving that the momentum is there going into this next year.
Joseph Williams, I saw an interesting report on the role that the United States military plays in climate change. Scientists at Durham University and the University of Lancaster in the United Kingdom say that the US military is among the largest climate polluters in history, consuming more liquid fuels and emitting more CO2 than most countries do. And Science Daily says that this carbon footprint, as it put it, must be confronted. Yet, as we know, the US military is a very powerful lobby. It always gets what it wants. It's treated as some revered, untouchable entity in the United States. Can it be confronted?
The short answer is yes, but the longer answer is it's complicated. I recall under the President Obama administration, the Secretary of the Navy had plans in place and boasted about how a lot of the U.S. military aircraft were running on renewable fuels, which was kind of mind-blowing. But he was talking about a small percentage, an experimental program that had U.S. military aircraft using green fuels, U.S. ships using green fuels. But I'll tell you, the reason why the military is so sacrosanct is because the United States believes that this is the key to its strength. But the problem that we're confronting here, the problem that they will have to confront, is the fact that climate change is having an effect on national security, and it is a national security issue. One need look no further than Norfolk Naval Air Station and the Norfolk Navy base, which is one of the largest in the world, and it suffers from flooding repeatedly. As a matter of fact, in one of the most recent defense analyses reports that I read maybe a year or so ago, they're calling climate change at that base one of the biggest threats to security that they've confronted since the fall of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. So whether they like it or not, the military is going to have to confront this, mainly because it's starting to have a direct impact on their ability to operate and on the ability to answer threats around the world. Now, as far as the military all of a sudden going green, that's hard to see. I don't think that they will be able to do it on a large scale. But I do think that it starts with recognizing that there is a problem, and that problem is staring them right in the face on more than one military base in the United States, much less around the world.
Right, and Joseph, as you say, it's something that they're going to have to confront, but do you sense that there is a recognition in the military of the threat that climate change poses?
It depends on who you ask. If you ask certain generals, yes, they do understand this. The people on the upper echelon, they kind of get it, but it's not a unified response across the service. You go further down and further down the line, you may have some mid-level commanders here and there who might understand that this is something that needs to happen. Certainly at the boot level, maybe 25 to 30% of the boot soldiers might recognize this as an issue, but this is not part of their day-to-day. Their primary role, their main job, is to protect the United States. Climate change is way over here on as far as their agenda items are concerned. But again, they are going to have to make this a priority. And under a Biden administration, it is probable that the military will be called to account. But I know that the planners and the military long-term strategists do see it as an issue and have gone so far as to say that it is a national security issue on par with nuclear war and on par with regional conflicts.
Changwa, we were talking a moment ago about the huge challenge that China faces in meeting its goal, trying to be carbon neutral by 2060. How far along the road has China gone in adopting renewable energy?
I think in the last decade has definitely made the case from China perspective, and so not only from technology development perspective, but also from the capability of fast industrializing the clean technology, solar and wind, energy in particular. That's why actually, the cost could be dropping so fast. With a particular recognized contribution globally, actually, to China, because China has made it happen, literally. And so, as I said, on one side, it's very exciting, not only solar, wind, but energy storage, smart grids, microgrids, all the technologies are coming on board. We literally see the light at the end of the tunnel. But in the meantime, we have to live in the reality, and coal continues to be a big part of the energy structure in the country. And so, the commitment made by the president globally is so crucial in a way that's really finally the country has to shift, dramatically. That's why I call it a radical decarbonization. You could imagine, transition is already very disruptive. It has to be radical. The disruption will be huge. It's going to really test the country's determination, commitment, and also resilience, in that process, so that China will be able to make the case. It's not just for the sake of reducing carbon, but more importantly, it's to transform how we're going to grow a different economy.
Chang-Hua, one of the other challenges that we don't hear about very often is seasonal changes in China. For instance, in the province of Hunan, that province gets most of its energy from hydropower, but it is dependent on the season, because sometimes there just isn't the water there to drive these turbines. How does that complicate the situation in China?
Well, the energy system is always complicated, particularly now with the shift towards the renewable or clean energies there. So if you look at that landscape, actually, solar, wind, hydro, you mentioned the biomass. So what's required actually in order to make sure we deploy those technologies actually to use cleaner energy, we have to make sure we have enough technology capability. We call something like grids, flexibility, the system, right? And so that's also part of the clean energy technology revolution, that not only the large state-owned companies like State Grid, China Southern Grid are playing a big role in that process, but also so much innovation happening now to make sure we have the capability, technical capability, and really deploy them so that we'll be able to tolerate or accommodate actually the flexibility that's required in terms of meeting the seasonal variation among other uncertainties.
Alice Hill, business people are very fond of telling us that whenever there is a crisis, there is also an opportunity. And if we look at the coronavirus pandemic, it's hit economies all over the world, including the United States. But as countries try to recover, is there an opportunity to shift away from fossil fuels and move towards renewable energy? In fact, one British newspaper said the climate crisis should be at the heart of the global COVID recovery.
Well, I agree with that assessment that it should, but so far, with many of the stimulus packages that have been passed across the globe, we've seen really reinvestment in brown or fossil fuel, not so much green. The big standout here, I think, is the EU, which has been a leader, as well as France, and South Korea has really made a switch to focusing on a green recovery. But we need the United States to prove, as it goes forward with its latest stimulus package, as well as other countries around the globe, that this is the time to take the step to be green. If we don't do it now, of course, we will have spent so much money, it will be that much harder for us to take what we know will help keep us safe. And if we continue to subsidize fossil fuels, if we continue to build coal plants, if we continue down these paths that we've already set ourselves on, it will not render the globe in any kind of condition that will be livable in many areas. And in particular, China will be hard hit, and parts of the United States will be hard hit from these impacts. So it's in the best interest of both countries to do a lot better on trying to find ways to cut our emissions, including through stimulus that we will use during this crisis.
Shweta, another country that's at the center of the climate change debate is India, because of its size, its huge population, and its expanding economy. The Indian Environment Minister says India is not responsible for the problem of climate change, and he argues that India contributes only 6.8% of global emissions. He blamed developed countries rather, for not fulfilling their commitments. It's become very political. It's a blame game going on here. Do you think the big nations of the world can get past this blame game?
They really need to, and I echo what my colleague Alice just said, in that we can't point fingers. Ultimately, everybody is going to suffer. So this whole "you take the lead" or "I won't do anything myself" is not going to result in anything except widespread pain and suffering for the citizens of particularly vulnerable countries, and that includes India. India is one of and my family's from Calcutta, which is one of the most vulnerable cities in one of the most vulnerable countries to the worst-case scenarios of climate change, including droughts and floods and increased heat waves that are resulting in not just agricultural calamities, but also looking at just deaths, farmer suicides that are coming out of this. So there's a lot of ripple effects to not taking action. And India has lofty goals. The Prime Minister recently said at the interim conference that was hosted in the UK that he promises by the centennial, India's centennial as an independent nation, 1947, so in 2047, that not only would India exceed its own targets, but it would exceed global expectations. That's fine, but we need to see what the national commitments will be. So far, the investment, there hasn't been any emission caps, but there's been $100 billion in investment into renewables, and we've seen pickup of solar, we've seen pickup of natural gas, but ultimately, if we don't get energy security through a more renewable portfolio, we're going to see that widespread suffering, not just in the US, not just in China, not just in India, but especially those countries most vulnerable.
Joseph, very quickly, I've got less than a minute. There's so much going on in the United States right now. We're going through a transition. There's the pandemic. There's the recovery plans are being talked about right now. But broadly speaking, where is U.S. public opinion on the issue of climate change? How far up the list of priorities is this?
It's become like a number 2 or number 3 priority. President-elect Biden mentioned it repeatedly during the debates leading up to the election. He has made it an agenda item in appointing John Kerry as his climate czar, so to speak, and in building his cabinet around that foundation. The public is ahead of the politicians on this, but I think Biden's positions and his appointments and his statements bode well for bringing the public even further along to get what needs to be done. And I think the pandemic has had a huge effect on that as well, not to mention the fact that people have stopped driving, the people have seen the changes when CO2 reduces in the atmosphere. I think that this is a very good start. It's a tough road, it's an uphill road, but it's a good place to start.
Okay, thank you everyone for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us. Hello everybody, I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists and others. It's a fresh, focused and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict or US politics, The Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find The Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search The Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.